I am all for protecting women. But we also have to protect men too. And for that reason, I'm a no.
House Bill 1958 relates to stealthing. Stealthing is a term used in the context of sexual intercourse, and it refers to the intentional removal or destruction of a sexually protective device, most often a condom, by one person without the consent of the other person. A person who engaged in sexual activity with another person may bring a civil action against that other person if the other person engaged in the sexual activity after removing the sexually protective device without the consent of the plaintiff. Additionally, House Bill 1958 authorizes a civil action against a person who misled a plaintiff into believing that a sexually protective device was being used, but knew that the device was not used or had been tampered with.
I've been involved in litigating some of these, and some of it comes down to whether a condom was broken, whether or not somebody poked a hole in a condom to get pregnant. I mean, it goes both ways in terms of how you can tamper.
If we're going to look at stealthing, where somebody either removes a device or says that they are using something that they're not, that is something that, in the interest of balance, we need to look at both sides. You know, we talk about poking a hole, that type of thing for pregnancy. That can work the same way if a person says that they're using birth control and they're not. So really the idea behind this is parity. So I'm asking for a yes vote.
IUDs and the pill and other devices of that nature, or birth control, is not analogous to physically protective devices and other physical barriers. And it's outside of the intent of this bill. And I would recommend, if you would like to see a bill regarding that, that you would bring that forth. But the intention of this particular bill is about the barrier devices that are used in consensual sex being physically removed. And I recommend a no. As a person who's actually been the victim of stealthing, I believe that we need options to hold persons accountable and to prevent these things from happening in the first place. I've seen it with survivors of domestic violence who have talked about it in their relationships with their partners, where it is a tool to attempt to get the other partner pregnant and have them entrapped.
And I find myself in a little bit of an odd situation being a female. I see, wonderful opportunities in this bill that absolutely would help protect females that are in these precarious situations. The other side of this, though, is that I see other options that could make the bill even better that aren't being really considered.
Good member from the 19th to move adoption of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please move Amendment 844.
It has been moved and seconded that Amendment 844 be adopted. Remarks. The good member from the 19th Legislative District, Representative Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Someone more qualified than I is going to speak to the amendment.
The good member from the 26th Legislative District, Representative Caldeer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this body, I have heard people speak about equity amongst genders. And this underlying bill not only, has a premise where it would protect women, but at the same time, there is also another issue that we have to look at. And that is that for many women, there are devices that they have to protect from becoming pregnant. And what we have to consider is that if a woman says that they have those protective devices and they are not being honest, they could get pregnant, and that man would be financially responsible for that child until they turn 18. That is not fair. We should support men and women equally in this chamber. So I encourage adoption of this amendment.
Further remarks? The good member from the 36th Legislative District, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask for you to vote no on this amendment. This bill has been broadly stakeholdered with survivors and organizations that work in this work, particularly with women. And broadening this definition to beyond a physical barrier device will open up unintended consequences, especially that can be weaponized against the victims that we are trying to protect in this bill. So please vote no. Thank you.
Further remarks? Seeing none, the question before the House is adoption of Amendment 844. We'll proceed to an oral vote. Those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. No. The amendment is not adopted. The good member from the 36th Legislative District, Representative Berry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill will give a pathway to justice for survivors of sexual assault. When my first good friend came to me and told me her story about how a consensual sexual partner removed his condom during sex, I immediately understood that this was out of the bounds of consent. She had not consented to the risk of pregnancy. She had not consented to the risk of STIs. And yet, she has no ability to pursue justice under our current laws. I am voting yes today for my friend, and I am voting yes today for the thousands who seek justice under this law.
The good member from the 26th Legislative District, Representative Calderon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to be encouraging a no on this bill. And the sad part is I actually wanted to vote for it. And the reason why is because I believe in equity for both men and women. For a man to remove a protective device and inadvertently get a woman pregnant, that is awful. That is absolutely awful. But at the same time, we also have to think about the other side. If a woman goes in to a relationship and tells the man that they have an IUD, even if they do at that time, what happens if they remove it 3 months later and they want to get pregnant and the man doesn't want to? And she lies to him. With our current system, that man is on the hook for hundreds of thousands of dollars for the life of that child that he never consented to. Why is that not an issue? Had that amendment been taken, I would have overwhelmingly supported this bill. I'm sorry, but I am all for protecting women. But we also have to protect men too. And for that reason, I'm a no.
Mr. Speaker, there are 64 yeas, 33 nays, 1 excused.
Having received a constitutional majority, House Bill 1958 is declared passed.
Before you now is House Bill 1958 relating to non-consensual removal of or tampering with a sexually protective device. Stealthing generally refers to the intentional removal or destruction of a condom or another sexually protected device during sexual intercourse by one partner without the other partner's consent.
Would this apply to birth control if one of the parties were saying that they had birth control but that was fraudulent?
The definition of sexually protected device excludes things such as intrauterine devices, IUDs, and also hormonal birth control.
Consent is a cornerstone of any healthy sexual relationship, and when one party deliberately sabotages the protection agreed upon, it amounts to a blatant betrayal of trust.
I practiced gynecology for nearly 20 years and currently have a counseling practice for women specializing in medical trauma. I'm pleased to testify in strong support of this bill. Non-consensual condom removal, commonly known as stealthing, is a very serious issue of sexual and reproductive violence.
We connect with hundreds of survivors annually, and through these calls for the past several years, we have learned that many survivors experience stealthing. This is another form of sexual assault and sexual coercion. Our current laws do not provide a victim of stealthing a clear remedy. We want processes and systems that recognize the many forms of abuse and assault that are part of sexual violence.
We're going to close the public hearing on House Bill 1958.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For those signed in not wanting to testify, there are 185 pro and 182 con.
Amendment November, offered by Senator Wilson, would include hormonal birth control methods in the definition of sexually protected devices.
Any questions on that one? Senator Trudeau.
Thank you, Ryan. Does this mean, what is this actually, the effect of this? Because is if there's a consequence of an unintended pregnancy that results from the, can you just tell me what the effect of this is by including the hormonal birth control?
Thank you for your question, Senator. So by including the hormonal birth control methods in the definition of sexually protective devices, effectively what that would mean is that in any of those instances or the causes of actions, I guess, in the underlying bill. So for example, if a person engaged or continued to engage in sexual contact or sexual penetration after, I guess, knowing that a hormonal birth control method had been removed, so say like a patch, for example, right? Then they would be liable potentially under the civil cause of action.
So there wouldn't have to be anything that results from that. It's just saying that if the person says they were on a hormonal birth control and then wasn't.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And that has generated another question. Senator Cooter.
So I guess I'm curious, I mean, what if somebody just forgets to take the birth control? Does that count as removing it?
In that instance, I think that under the underlying civil cause of action, a person who engages in sexual contact, sexual penetration must understand and agree that certain sexual protective devices would be used. And so, again, most of the underlying cause of actions deals with either tampering with the sexually protected device or removing the sexually protected device. There's no cause of action under here that says stopping, I guess, or stopping the use of a sexually protected device, such as like birth control pills, would be implicated under that civil cause of action. Though, again, it's a little ambiguous, I think. It just depends on how a court would interpret some of these civil causes of actions.
November has been moved and seconded. Senator Wilson, would you like to speak about your amendment?
Yes, thank you. The amendment ensures that the acts of deception covered by the statute include instances where a woman tells a man that she is on hormonal birth control, but actually is not. As written, the statute will most likely be applied against men, and yet a man would be foreclosed from relief if a woman intentionally deceived him and told him that she was on hormonal birth control, but in fact wasn't, and there was a subsequent pregnancy where he then would be responsible for child support. I think that we're talking about equity all the time, and yet it's only seems to be one-sided here on this bill, and so we should be adding this to it too, because it does happen.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask for a no vote on this. When we're talking about sexually protective devices, the underlying bill talks a lot about the physical ones that are present, and then the testimony we heard from so many individuals was really about the act of stealthing. So I'm going to ask for a no vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. No. The amendment fails.
House Bill 1958 on third reading and final passage. Remarks, Senator Dengra.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have done a lot of work in the last few years in our criminal code, our civil code, our education system to really talk about healthy relationships and, more importantly, consent. This bill before us today continues this work in establishing consent in sexual relations. It creates a civil cause of action for non-consensual removal of or tampering with a sexually protective device, or for misleading a person into believing that a sexually protective device was used.
Senator Wilson Linda.
There are some concerns here. We'll probably have a mixed vote on this side that really it's kind of one-sided. There is also the opportunities for women who say they're on the birth control pill and they are not on the birth control pill when they've stated that to the partner.
I just want to rise and add my voice, asking for a yes vote on this bill. We spend a lot of time in this chamber talking about what we're going to do to protect victims, support victims. This bill is happening because victims of this practice came forward and told their stories. Stories that are deeply embarrassing, that they had to be very vulnerable to tell these stories in public. And because they did, Mr. President, we have this bill before us today that will send the message that this kind of conduct is completely unacceptable.
Mr. President, there are 43 yeas, 6 nay.
Having received a constitutional majority, House Bill 1958 is declared passed. The title of the bill will be the title of the act.